The snow that morning looked almost too pure, a fragile sheet of white stretched over a world already broken. It muffled the sound of footsteps, yet her heart still heard them, heavy, merciless boots crushing the silence of her village. Celine clutched a bundle of scraps close to her chest, meant for her brother, who waited hidden beneath an old tree, his eyes bright with hunger and fear. She had thought she could be invisible, that she could slip through shadows like smoke. But fate does not allow invisibility for long, not when destiny has already chosen you. The soldiers came with the dawn, cloaked in steel and cruelty. They spoke of rebels, of punishment, of blood owed to the crown. They saw a trembling Omega girl and thought she was nothing. Yet when the commander pressed a blade to her throat, something ancient and restless stirred inside her. The moment cracked open like ice beneath fire. She remembered only fragments, steel flashing in her hands, screams erupting like thunder, the red spray against snow. Wolves who had mocked her weakness lay sprawled at her feet, their disbelief still etched in lifeless eyes. Her chest burned, her grip slippery with blood, not her own. She staggered, thinking death would follow in the next breath. Instead, silence came, a silence so thick it swallowed even the wind. Then the rhythm of bootsteps, heavier, slower, carrying a weight that pressed down on her bones. The air itself bent to him. The Alpha King. Aldrich moved through the carnage like winter-given flesh, broad shoulders wrapped in fur, golden eyes glowing with a hunger older than fire. His gaze pinned her where she stood, trembling yet unbroken. For a breath, she thought he would order her execution. Instead, his growl cut through the frozen air. "Clean her and bring her to me." Chains clinked, biting into her wrists and ankles. She fought, but exhaustion dragged her to her knees. The world blurred, torches flaring against the stone of a fortress carved into mountains, shadows of wolves dancing across iron gates. Every heartbeat sounded louder than drums. Every step toward his hall deepened the sense that something vast, dangerous, and unchangeable had begun. Inside, firelight flickered across vaulted ceilings. Banners of fallen clans hung like ghosts above her head. Warriors lined the walls, silent as statues, while she was thrown onto the cold marble floor. She raised her eyes and found him seated upon a throne of bone and iron. Aldrich did not smile. He studied her with the stillness of a predator, as though peeling away the layers of her soul. His voice, when it came, was sharp as steel sliding into flesh. "Tell me, little wolf, what are you?" Defiance rose in her like flame. She did not bow. She did not beg. Perhaps it was madness. Perhaps it was survival. But her chin lifted even as blood dripped from her shackled wrists. She whispered to herself that she would give him nothing. Not her secrets, not her fear, not the last fragile piece of her name. And yet, deep inside, something stirred, like a door creaking open on forgotten hinges. His gaze had awakened a truth she had never dared to imagine. Around them, the court expected her death. Around them, whispers clung like smoke, calling her cursed, calling her dangerous. But the king leaned forward, his golden eyes gleaming with something unspoken, recognition, or perhaps the spark of a bond neither of them could deny. That night, in the silence of her cell, she thought of the blood that had stained her hands and the mark of his gaze that lingered against her skin. She told herself she would not break. Yet the darkness whispered otherwise. It whispered that this was only the beginning, that the path she had stepped upon would carve itself into prophecy, love, and ruin. And if you felt even a heartbeat of her fire stirring inside your own chest, if her defiance sparks something unspoken within you, I invite you to stay with me. Share your thoughts, let your voice be heard in the comments, and walk deeper into this tale by leaving your mark with a like and a gentle subscription. Every gesture is a thread weaving us closer, a healing reminder that stories, like hearts, grow stronger when shared. The chains on her wrists had not yet loosened, the king's eyes had not yet softened, but destiny had already begun to burn, and it would lead them both into battles of blood and love, of shadows, and the fragile hope of something tender rising from ruin. The cold stone beneath her knees had long since numbed her skin, yet the fire in her chest refused to die. Chains cut into her wrists, leaving angry marks that pulsed with each heartbeat. The throne hall was silent but for the echo of her own ragged breath, a silence heavy with judgment, with the weight of eyes that saw her as nothing more than a condemned shadow. Still, Celine lifted her head. The flames of the torches danced across her torn clothes, across the blood that still clung to her skin, but she would not tremble, not before them, not before him. Aldrich descended from his throne like a storm disguised in human form, every step echoing with power that made the ground seem less certain beneath her. His golden eyes gleamed, sharp as claws, and yet beneath the predator's hunger there was something else, curiosity, maybe even recognition. He circled her slowly, the court holding its breath, as if they too feared the shift in the air. His voice rolled over her like thunder, deep and controlled, yet edged with danger. "How does an Omega tear through my finest warriors?" The word Omega cracked like a lash, meant to remind her of her place, of her insignificance. But Celine's chin did not lower. Her lips curved with a bitter smile, her voice raw but steady. "Maybe you've never met one with nothing left to lose." Gasps rippled through the hall, courtiers whispering of madness, warriors tightening their grips on hilts. Yet Aldrich's gaze sharpened. For the briefest heartbeat, his smirk faltered, as though her words struck somewhere deep beneath his armor. When he reached for her, his hand tilted her chin upward, forcing her eyes to meet his. His touch burned, not with tenderness, but with power, a reminder that he could break her with a single motion. Yet she did not yield. The chains rattled as she leaned into defiance, and he smiled, slow, dangerous, unsettling in its amusement. "You don't bow. You don't tremble. Every Omega I've ever known has crawled at my feet. And yet, you—" His gaze lingered, golden and unrelenting. "You defy." The hall seemed to shrink, the voices of advisers and courtiers fading into dust around them. She could feel only his presence, the tension between them, as if the space itself bent toward collision. He asked what she had lost, and though memories surged, her village aflame, her brother's cry swallowed by steel, she swallowed them back, keeping the rawest pieces of herself hidden. "Enough to know I'll never serve a king." Shock fractured the chamber like glass. Elders called for her death. Warriors demanded her blood. Yet Aldrich silenced them all with a flick of his hand. His smirk returned, darker than before, and his command struck like a brand. "You'll fight for me now." The words shattered her breath. Death she had expected, chains she could endure, but to fight for him, to become his weapon, it was a leash disguised as mercy. The uproar of the court filled the room, shouts of outrage colliding with disbelief, but Aldrich only stood taller, his presence silencing even the loudest. His hand brushed her chin one last time, lingering just enough to burn through her resolve, and his whisper sealed the bond of command. "Defy me again, and I'll break you. But fight for me, and perhaps you'll discover why fate brought you here." Dragged through winding corridors of stone and shadow, Celine felt the weight of his words wrapping around her like invisible chains. The palace was colder than the forest, colder than the snow where she had first bled for survival. Torches burned with restless light, casting long shadows that felt like claws along the walls. When the guards shoved her into a narrow cell, the stench of rust and moss clung to her lungs. She thought she would be alone, left to rot. But a voice stirred from the darkness. "You shouldn't be here," the figure murmured, chained against the wall. His eyes gleamed, tired but alive, sharper than the stone around them. Celine pressed herself back against the iron, wary, her voice low and sharp. "And what would you know of me?" The man's weary smile held a weight she could not name. "Enough to know you are not what you pretend to be." His words struck like a blade twisting into her ribs. She claimed to be nothing but an omega, but his bitter laugh cracked the air. If that were true, half the palace guard would still breathe tonight. Her fists clenched against her chains, rage and denial battling in her chest. "I don't need to know what runs in my veins. All I need is freedom." The prisoner's voice softened, almost pitying, and yet it cut deeper than any blade. "Child, your freedom died the moment the Alpha King laid eyes on you." Her throat tightened. She turned away, unwilling to let him see the fear gnawing at her bones. Yet his words echoed, relentless, as though unlocking a door she had not known was there. Time bled into silence, broken only by the steady drip of water against stone. And then, in the hush of fading torches, he leaned closer, his voice a whisper that struck like lightning. "They call you Celine now, but that is not the name you were born with." Her heart lurched. She snapped toward him, eyes wide, breath catching. "What did you just say?" His lips curled into something fragile, almost reverent. And then he spoke the name. A name forbidden, a name erased, yet familiar as the pulse in her veins. "Your true name is Aria." The syllables tore through her like fire. Memories flickered, ghosts of lullabies, fragments of faces lost to blood and smoke. The chains felt tighter, the cells smaller, as if the truth itself sought to crush her. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but before she could, the heavy door creaked open. Guards stepped in, their torches spilling light into the dark. "The king summons her." The prisoner's eyes burned with secrets he did not share, sorrow heavy in his gaze as they dragged her away. Her pulse thundered, her mind drowning in the echo of the forbidden name. Aria. As the corridors swallowed her once again, she felt his presence before she saw him. Aldrich, leaning in the shadows above, his golden eyes sharp, testing, consuming. He watched her not as a prisoner, but as a puzzle, a riddle he would break or bind. Her breath caught, for in that gaze lay not only danger, but the promise of something more, something that could either heal or destroy her. And as the gates of the arena groaned open, the murmurs of the gathered court carried like a storm rising. She was thrust forward, chains falling, a sword forced into her hand. Across the circle of firelight stood a warrior as massive as a bear, scars carved into his flesh like ancient runes. The trial by combat had begun, and destiny waited on the edge of a blade. The arena roared with anticipation, though no sound touched her more than the silence inside her own chest. Chains slipped from her wrists, heavy metal clattering to the sand as if fate itself had dropped its mask. The sword pressed into her hand was unfamiliar, its weight uneven, its grip too large for her slender fingers, but Celine's pulse steadied. She did not need perfection. She needed only the will to survive. Firelight blazed along the circle, painting her blood-stained skin in shades of gold and shadow. Across from her, the king's commander, Garin, loomed like a mountain, carved of scar and muscle, his blade gleaming with the promise of death. The herald's voice cracked like thunder. Trial by combat. The crowd erupted, nobles sneering, soldiers grinning, advisers whispering wagers. To them, this was spectacle. A cursed Omega thrown to the king's hound for amusement before her inevitable death. But to Celine, this was no stage. It was life clawing against chains, hope tearing against despair. She inhaled, the cold air stinging her lungs, and whispered to herself the vow that kept her upright. I will not bow, not now, not ever. Garin's roar split the circle. He lunged forward, his strikes brutal, each swing a storm meant to crush rather than cut. Sparks spat as steel met steel, the clash reverberating through her bones. He pressed her back with each blow, his size and strength overwhelming, the sand shattering beneath his boots. Her body screamed with effort, yet something deep within her, something ancient, kept her moving. She twisted where others would stumble, parried where others would break. Gasps rippled through the crowd when she ducked low, sliding beneath a strike that could have cleaved her skull and slashed upward. Her blade kissed his thigh, tearing through flesh. Garin bellowed, staggering to one knee, blood soaking the sand. The air thickened with disbelief. An Omega had wounded the king's fiercest commander. But Celine did not falter. Fury surged like fire, and with one savage motion she ripped his own weapon from his grasp. The world seemed to blur. Her breath thundered in her ears as she slammed the hilt of the stolen blade against his skull. The sound of bone cracking silenced the arena. Garin collapsed, motionless. The circle was still. Celine stood trembling, chest heaving, her face speckled with sweat and blood. She raised her chin, daring the court to meet her gaze. Whispers slithered like snakes through the torches. Cursed, dangerous, impossible. But the truth was undeniable. She had defeated Garin. And then came the sound that froze her pulse. Slow, deliberate footsteps descending from the balcony above. The crowd parted as Aldrich entered the circle, his cloak trailing behind him like wings carved of night. His smirk was not of triumph, nor of rage, but of something far more perilous, curiosity sharpened into hunger. He drew his sword with unhurried grace, the steel catching firelight until it glowed like a brand, the tip leveled at her throat. "Now you fight me." Her breath caught. Her body ached from the battle, her muscles raw, yet her grip tightened on the blade. The arena held its breath. To fight the Alpha King was not survival, it was suicide. But when his golden eyes bore into hers, she found no space for surrender. She raised her sword, her voice cutting through the stillness. "You want to fight, King? Then bleed with me." Their clash was unlike anything the court had ever seen. His strikes were measured, merciless, each swing of his blade a test of her soul. She met him stroke for stroke, her movements fierce and fluid, defiance carved into every step. Sparks leapt from their blades, steel shrieking against steel, sand spraying beneath their boots. Gasps rose as she forced him back a pace, the impossible etched into reality before their eyes. For a fleeting instant, their eyes locked mid-strike. His assessing, fierce, yet carrying a flicker of something deeper, something dangerous. Hers, burning with rebellion, threaded with fear but refusing to yield. It was not just combat. It was connection. Two storms colliding, two wolves circling, neither willing to bow. And then, with desperate precision, she twisted beneath his guard. Her blade rose, its edge biting near his throat. The crowd erupted, half in horror, half in awe. The unbreakable Alpha King stood one breath from defeat at the hands of a blood-soaked Omega. Her pulse roared. Victory tasted like fire. One strike more, and she could end him. One strike, and she could sever every chain. But his hand shot forward faster than thought. His grip clamped around her wrist, halting her blade inches from his throat. His sword clattered to the ground, yet his gaze never wavered. His voice, low and lethal, silenced the roaring arena. "Do it! Strike me down!" Her sword trembled. His smirk was gone, replaced by something darker, knowledge, challenge, promise. His words coiled around her like chains. "Kill me, and you will never know the truth of your bloodline." The whisper burned through her veins more savagely than any wound. Bloodline. The prisoner's words, "Your true name is Aria," echoed like a ghost. Her chest heaved, torn between freedom and the unknown. The court watched, ravenous for blood. Every soul demanded her choice. Her heart thundered with the weight of it. To kill and break free, or to spare, and remain shackled to secrets she did not understand. Slowly, with defiance sharper than steel, she lowered the blade. Gasps scattered like shattered glass. Fury and disbelief shook the court, but Aldrich straightened, his grip still firm on her wrist. His smirk returned, unreadable, dangerous. His voice carried across the Colosseum like a blade slicing through chaos. "She spares me, not out of mercy, but out of wisdom." The uproar raged, nobles crying of witchcraft, advisers demanding execution. But Aldrich silenced them with a single raised hand, his golden gaze claiming her as though defiance itself belonged to him. That night, the palace whispered of betrayal and prophecy, of an Omega who defied kings and bent fate. Celine was no longer just a girl drenched in blood. She was the storm they could not cage. In the solitude of her gilded chamber, where velvet drapes suffocated like shackles, she felt the world pressing in. Freedom remained a blade's edge, her fate entwined with a king's dangerous smirk and the shadows of secrets yet unspoken. Her heart ached with longing for the healing touch of silence, for the gentle promise of a life untouched by war. But the mark of this night carved deeper than any scar. And even as her eyes closed in restless sleep, the weight of his words lingered like fire in her veins. This was no end. It was only the beginning, and the storm ahead would demand more than defiance. It would demand the surrender of her very heart. The stone corridors of the palace whispered with secrets as Celine was led away from the Colosseum, her wrists raw from chains, though her spirit burned brighter than ever. Whispers of her defiance rippled ahead of her, carried by servants and guards, like wildfire slipping through dry grass. An Omega who bested Garin. An Omega who nearly struck the king. The words coiled through every hall, feeding fear and awe in equal measure. Yet in the hollow of her chest, beneath the blood still drying on her skin, a strange warmth pulsed, an ache she could not name, half dread, half healing. The cell they cast her into was not of iron this time, but of stone dressed in velvet, golden drapes and silk cushions masking the truth. She was still a prisoner. The room glowed with false luxury, its beauty sharper than chains. She paced its length, her bare feet silent against marble, her heart restless with the memory of his eyes, those golden flames that had met her blade, not with rage, but with a challenge too intimate, too binding. Sleep would not come. Each time she closed her eyes, she felt again the weight of his hand clamped around her wrist, the tremor of his growl when he demanded she strike. And beneath it, deeper than she dared admit, she felt the thrum of something ancient tying itself between them, a thread that pulled no matter how she tried to sever it. She whispered into the silence, a prayer not to gods, but to her own fractured soul. I am not his. I will not be anyone's. But fate is deaf to such vows. The council gathered that night, their voices echoing like steel blades scraping against one another. They called her cursed, called her a danger that must be eradicated. Plans were woven in shadows, assassination, whispers of knives in the dark. Yet she heard none of this as she stood by the window, staring at the moon heavy above the palace walls. All she felt was the tension in the air, the sense of eyes upon her, even when she stood alone. The door creaked open. A guard entered, his movements too careful, too deliberate. His dagger gleamed faintly in the candlelight, his face taut with duty and regret. His words fell like ash. Forgive me, Omega. Orders. Tonight, you die. Her body moved before her mind. Instinct roared alive. She caught his wrist, the dagger halting inches from her throat, their breaths colliding in a storm of effort. Her muscles screamed as steel bit into her skin, a thin line of heat spilling across her neck. "Tell me who sent you," she hissed, her voice a blade sharper than the one she fought. But his silence was louder than any confession, his loyalty shackled not to her life, but to her death. And then the air itself shifted. Chains of shadow seemed to crawl across the walls, the fire in the torches bending as if in fear. The door slammed wide, and with it came the fury of the Alpha King. Aldrich's presence devoured the chamber. His eyes blazed molten gold, his aura curling like claws of fire and storm. The assassin's dagger fell uselessly to the floor, wrenched free by unseen force. Celine staggered, clutching the wound at her throat, but before her knees could buckle, Aldrich's hand steadied her waist. For one trembling heartbeat, their faces were too close, his breath mingling with hers, his strength a shield that burned like both torment and healing. Then he turned, unleashing wrath upon the traitor. His voice thundered, primal and raw. "You dare raise steel against what is mine?" The words lashed across the chamber, branding Celine even as she recoiled. With one merciless strike, Aldrich lifted the assassin by his throat, demanding the name of the hand that sent him. But the man's silence held until his final breath snapped in the king's grip, his body falling lifeless to the marble. The scent of blood clung heavy in the air. Celine pressed a trembling hand against the shallow cut at her neck, fury and fear warring inside her. "You should have let him speak. I could have had a name." Aldrich's gaze turned upon her, fierce and unyielding. "He would have lied. The council festers with vipers. I will root them out in my own way." Their eyes clashed, her defiance striking against his dominance like steel on stone. Yet beneath his rage she sensed something else, something dangerous. Possession, yes, but also a raw protective heat that unsettled her more than hatred ever could. She hated that a part of her did not hate it. Before she could speak, horns split the night. The palace trembled. Smoke seeped through the cracks of stone, and a guard burst into the chamber, his armor scorched. "My king, the walls are breached. Wolves from the northern clans have entered. They demand the girl." Celine's heart clenched. She barely had breath to whisper, "Me?" And then the howl came, echoing across the burning courtyard, shaking the foundations of the palace. A monstrous figure stood bathed in fire, scars slashing across his massive body, his soldiers a tide of shadows behind him. His voice carried with cruel certainty, "Hand over the Omega, or I will tear this kingdom apart." The rival Alpha's claim hung heavy in the smoke. Aldrich's eyes narrowed, his aura blazing like wildfire. He stood at the shattered balcony, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "You dare breach my gates and demand what is mine?" The rival Alpha laughed, raising a hand to reveal a crest gleaming silver and black. Ancient, unmistakable. Celine's knees nearly buckled. She had seen it before, clutched in her father's dying hand, burned into her memory as the night her world ended. Her voice broke as she cried, "That crest! It belonged to my family!" The hall erupted, the court fracturing into uproar, but she heard nothing except the sound of her own blood rushing in her ears. If the rival Alpha's words were true, then her past was not ashes, it was chains, binding her to a bloodline she had never asked for. Aldrich's growls silenced the chaos, his presence closing around her like armor and fire. Yet in his eyes burned something sharper than rage. Possession, yes, but deeper still, fear of losing her to a destiny he could not control. He stepped closer, voice low, lethal. "Tell me, little wolf, is he yours?" Celine's chin rose, though her heart thundered with a grief she could not name. "I belong to no one." Her voice cut through the storm, and for a heartbeat even the rival Alpha faltered. The words were fragile, but they burned like light through the smoke, a healing defiance that made the court whisper, not with scorn, but with something perilously close to respect. But the storm was not over. Aldrich's gaze lingered, heavy, claiming, torn between the bond fate had carved into their blood and the secrets she still kept locked inside. The rival Alpha's smirk promised war, his voice carrying one final vow. "When you tire of his chains, you will find me." Blood calls to blood. And as his army melted into the fire-lit shadows, Selene stood in the wreckage, her wrists still raw, her throat still stung with the near cut of a blade, her soul trembling between two truths. The dangerous pull of a king who had claimed her, and the haunting call of blood that refused to let her go. The palace did not sleep that night. Shadows lingered in every corner, and whispers travelled swifter than fire on dry grass. Selene paced the length of her chamber, the golden walls closing in like a cage disguised in velvet. Outside, the corridors hummed with hushed conspiracies, guards muttering, counsellors weaving threads of betrayal too sharp for silence to hold. She pressed her palm to the mark that burned faintly on her skin, Aldrich's claim carved into her flesh against her will. It pulsed like a second heartbeat, not painful now, but insistent, as though reminding her she was tethered to a force she could neither embrace nor escape. The fire in the hearth hissed, throwing shadows that twisted like claws across the stone. She leaned against the window, the night air cool on her fevered skin. For a moment she longed for peace, for healing quiet, the kind that wrapped the heart in soft arms and promised safety. But peace was not meant for her, not when the court sharpened daggers with her name engraved upon their hilts. She had nearly dozed when voices carried through the door, low and venomous. Tonight, before the moon sets, the council has decided. She dies, and the king will not even know who slit her throat. Her blood froze. She stepped back into the dark, every nerve thrumming. Her gaze landed on the ceremonial blade left near her bed, more ornament than weapon, yet sharp enough to draw blood if she dared. Her fingers brushed the hilt, her body coiling with instinct, and then the door creaked open. A guard slipped in, moving with the silence of someone who had already chosen betrayal. His eyes avoided hers, yet the dagger in his hand gleamed with fatal certainty. His voice cracked under the weight of his task. "Forgive me, Omega. Orders are orders. Your death keeps the kingdom intact." The world narrowed to the flash of steel. Selene's body reacted before thought. She lunged, her hand seizing his wrist, the dagger halting inches from her throat. Their eyes locked, the strain trembling through every muscle. Her voice was a hiss of fury. "Tell me who sent you." His silence answered more than words ever could. Sweat dripped from his temple, his face twisted with fear and duty. The blade pressed closer, a sharp sting drawing a line of blood along her skin. And then the air shattered. The door slammed open, the chamber swallowed in a storm of power. Aldrich entered like fire-given flesh, golden eyes blazing, his presence a weight that drove even the assassin to his knees. Shadows coiled around him, alive and feral, as though the palace itself bent to his wrath. With a single motion, the assassin's dagger clattered to the floor, his hand twisted by invisible force. Selene staggered, the cut at her throat burning, but before she could fall, Aldrich's arm steadied her. His touch was fire and iron, steadying her waist, dragging her back from the edge. For one unbearable heartbeat, their breaths mingled, his gaze searing hers with heat that left her trembling. She hated that the closeness felt like safety, like healing she had not asked for. Then his fury turned outward. "You dare raise steel against what is mine?" His voice rolled like thunder, the assassin choking in his grasp. Aldrich demanded a name, a truth. But the man's silence was unbroken until his neck snapped beneath the king's hand. The body fell lifeless to the floor, leaving the room steeped in the scent of blood and smoke. Celine pressed her hand against her throat, fury sparking through the trembling in her veins. "You should have let him speak. I could have had a name." Aldrich's gaze snapped to her, golden and unyielding. "He would have lied or died slower. The council is a nest of vipers. I will root them out my way." The clash of their stares filled the room, her defiance striking against his dominance until the tension felt sharp enough to draw blood. Yet beneath his rage was something she could not ignore, something darker and more dangerous than hatred. Protection, possession, a hunger that wrapped around her like chains, yet left a piece of her heart beating warmer against her will. Before either could speak again, the blast of war horns split the night. The chamber trembled, smoke rolled through the halls, thicker, harsher, alive with fire. A soldier stumbled in, armor scorched, breath ragged. "My king, the walls are breached. The northern clans are inside. They demand the girl." Celine's blood iced, her chest tightening as if invisible hands squeezed the air from her lungs. Outside, through the balcony, fire licked the stone, painting the night in crimson, and then a howl shattered the sky. A figure of monstrous size stepped into view, draped in furs, scars carved across his body like trophies of old war. His voice thundered across the courtyard, carrying with it chains, invisible but crushing. "Hand over the Omega, or I will tear this kingdom apart stone by stone." The rival Alpha's gaze rose to meet hers, amber eyes cruel and knowing. His words cut through the chaos, every syllable binding her tighter. "She belongs to me. Her blood is bound to my line." Gasps tore through the hall. The council erupted with cries of treason, of curses, of prophecy. Aldrich snarled from the balcony, his aura flaring like shadow and fire combined. "She is mine. No one lays claim to her but me." But Celine could not breathe, could not move. Her gaze locked on the crest, gleaming at the rival Alpha's wrist, silver and black, ancient and sharp as memory. She had seen it before, clutched in her father's hand the night his blood stained her childhood. Her voice broke, trembling but fierce. "That crest, it belonged to my family." The hall fractured into uproar, nobles shouting, wolves baring teeth, the storm swelling. Yet within her chest everything stilled. The truth had found her, heavy as iron and sharp as sorrow. Her blood was no longer her own. It was prophecy. It was weapon. It was war. Aldrich's growl cut through the chaos, his presence wrapping around her like fire against frost. But even as he stood before her, fierce and unyielding, she felt the world shifting beneath her feet. The rival Alpha's smirk promised battles yet to come, his voice carrying a vow that haunted the marrow of her bones. Blood calls to blood. And though she whispered again to herself, "I belong to no one," the words trembled, because somewhere in the depths of her soul the chains of destiny had already begun to tighten, dragging her into a storm she could not escape. The great hall had not yet healed from the clash of fire and fury when silence fell once more, that eerie silence that feels like the breath before a storm. The council still seethed, their whispers sharp as knives, their glances toward her laced with venom. They called her cursed, weapon, traitor. She heard every word, but refused to bend beneath them. Aldrich stood at the center, golden eyes blazing, his aura suffocating the chamber until even the bravest elder dared not speak again. Still, their poison lingered in the air, coiling around her like a noose. She felt it tightening, dragging her toward a fate not of her choosing. That night, when she lay in a chamber dressed in silks meant to disguise chains, she could not sleep. Her mind churned with the rival Alpha's words, with the crest that had belonged to her father, with the whispers that painted her as prophecy. The mark on her collarbone pulsed faintly, Aldrich's claim seared into her skin, not fading but deepening with every breath. She pressed her fingers against it, wishing she could scrape it away. Yet beneath her rage was something far more dangerous, a heat that warmed her chest, an ache that whispered of belonging. Healing and torment tangled into one, and she hated herself for the part of her that did not hate him. The hours dragged heavy until the door creaked open. She did not rise, though her hand tensed near the blade she kept hidden under her sheets. But it was not an assassin this time. It was Aldrich himself. He stepped inside, his presence filling the chamber, shadows clinging to him like loyal beasts. His silver gaze fixed on her, unreadable, torn between fury and something softer he would not name. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," she whispered, though her voice trembled, betraying the storm in her chest. His eyes burned brighter, his voice low, a growl edged with vulnerability. "And deny my wolf the only thing it's ever craved." He moved closer, the weight of him sinking into her bones, his aura wrapping around her like a storm that both suffocated and shielded. "Every breath you take is mine. Every scar you bear, I feel in my own flesh. You think I can let you die at dawn? I would tear the world apart first." Her defenses cracked. The walls she had built of fury, of grief, of defiance, trembled under the weight of his confession. Her lips parted, her breath catching on a truth she could not deny. "If I give in to this bond, Aldrich, there will be no turning back." He leaned closer, his claws grazing the shackles on her wrists, careful not to cut, careful in a way that startled her more than violence ever could. "Then don't turn back." The kiss was inevitable. It crashed between them like thunder splitting the night, fierce and starved, yet warm enough to burn through the shadows inside her. The mark on her skin flared, searing with light, and the bond pulsed like a heartbeat neither of them could deny. Wolf's bane melted away from her veins, as though burned by their union. Power surged through her body, raw and untamed, fire and shadow colliding until the chamber itself groaned. Chains shattered, stone cracked, torches blew out, the air whipping around them like a storm. When they broke apart, both gasping for breath, their foreheads pressed together, the truth shimmered between them, terrifying and undeniable. "What did we just do?" she whispered, her voice both awed and trembling. The answer never came. Above them, the palace walls cracked. Daylight split the ceiling, stone crumbling, the world itself bowing to what had been awakened. Screams echoed through the halls, courtiers crying prophecy, counselors shrieking doom. The Omega Queen, the Cursed One, the end of kings. Aldrich's voice roared over the chaos, silencing all who dared speak. "Any who touch her, die." His command rang through the palace like thunder, but still betrayal simmered. For every noble who bowed, another sharpened their blade. Then the horns sounded again, long, low, mourning. From the shattered walls she saw them, an ocean of wolves marching upon the palace, crimson banners bleeding under the sunlight. The rival Alpha's army had waited for this moment, for the weakness of division to open the gates. Now, with prophecy stirring in her veins and betrayal fracturing the crown, war could no longer be contained. Selene lifted her blade from the rubble, her hand steady, though her soul trembled. The bond burned within her, Aldrich's mark pulsing like fire beneath her skin, both a curse and a strange healing anchor that steadied her through the storm. Side by side, they stepped into the courtyard where blood already stained the marble. The rival Alpha's voice carried across the battlefield, cruel and triumphant. She is ours. She is the prophecy. And tonight she will choose. Aldrich snarled, his body a wall between her and the storm of enemies. But Selene's heart already knew. This was no longer about chains, no longer about crowns. This was about fate burning inside her blood, about the bond that could destroy or heal, about love tangled with ruin. Her voice cut through the clash of steel, trembling yet strong, defiance laced with something warmer, something alive. I belong to no one, but I will fight for my freedom, and for those who still believe in me. The battle began, steel and shadow colliding in a storm that would decide not only the kingdom's fate, but her own. And in the firelight, with Aldrich's golden eyes never leaving hers, Selene felt it, the beginning of a love that would tear down thrones and raise something new from the ashes. The battlefield seethed with chaos, but for Selene the world narrowed to the weight of Aldrich bleeding in her arms. His body, once unbreakable, trembled beneath her touch, crimson soaking her hands, hot and relentless. The rival Alpha's spear had torn through his side, cutting through flesh and armor, and yet he still stood long enough to shield her. He had fought like a storm, unchained, his roars shaking the very stones beneath their feet. But even storms must bow to the wounds of war. She pressed her palms to his wound, her tears mixing with blood. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice breaking like glass. Her heart refused to accept what her eyes already knew, that his breath was faltering, his chest rising slower with each beat. He reached up, his hand slick with blood, his thumb brushing her cheek as though memorizing her one last time. His gaze, though dimming, burned with a fierce light. "Listen to me," he rasped, his voice ragged with both strength and surrender. "You were never meant to serve me. You were meant to rule." The words split her open, a crown and curse pressed into her heart in the same breath. Her sobs echoed against the screams of the dying, her soul rebelling against his fading light. "No, you don't get to leave me. Not now. Not ever." She pressed harder, calling to her wolf, begging the bond to heal him, but his mark on her skin flickered, weakening with every heartbeat. The rival Alpha watched with a cruel smile, his spear lowered, savoring her despair. "Do you see it now, sister?" His voice cut through the clash of war. "The bond is chains. Love is weakness. You were born to rise above it all." Selene's chest constricted, her breath catching in horror. The word sister echoed inside her, shattering what little strength she had left. She staggered back, shaking her head, her sword trembling in her hand. "You lie!" But the rival Alpha's smirk widened, his amber eyes sharp with cruel satisfaction. "You feel it, don't you? The blood howls. You and I are bound not by prophecy, but by birth." Her world tilted, memories she had buried clawing to the surface. Her father's crest, her mother's lullabies, nights filled with fire and steel. She stumbled, and Aldrich's body sagged heavier against her. His grip tightened once more, his gaze anchoring her through the storm. "Don't believe him," he growled weakly, but his voice faltered, the strength draining from him. Her heart tore in two. Between the bond that tethered her to Aldrich and the bloodline the rival Alpha claimed, she felt the ground beneath her crack. She clutched Aldrich's face, pressing her lips to his forehead, desperate, trembling. "You are my choice. You are my home." But fate is crueler than vows. His chest stilled beneath her hands. His golden eyes dimmed, their light flickering out like the last candle in a storm. Her scream split the night, raw and jagged, shaking even the rival Alpha's soldiers to silence. She clung to him, her tears staining his skin, her voice breaking as she begged him back. "Fight, Aldrich, please. You are the Alpha King. You don't get to leave me." But he was gone. The rival Alpha's laughter rang out, cruel and merciless, echoing across the battlefield. "You see, love makes you weak. You were born for more. You were born for me." His soldiers howled, their voices merging with the clash of steel, the night alive with blood and fire. Something inside her snapped, not in surrender, but in awakening. The mark on her collarbone flared, not fading with Aldrich's death, but transforming, spreading across her skin like fire-given form. Her body trembled, her wolf roaring within, no longer caged, no longer small. Wind tore through the battlefield, lightning splitting the sky, and every eye turned to her. Warriors faltered, dropping their blades in awe and terror. She rose slowly, Aldrich's body slipping from her arms, her hair whipping like a banner in the storm. Her voice carried like thunder, trembling but powerful, woven with grief sharpened into fire. "You call me sister. You call me weak. But I am prophecy made flesh. I am bond and blood, and I will end you." The rival Alpha lunged, his spear a streak of steel. Their clash erupted like a storm unleashed. Spear met claw, steel met fury, each strike shaking the earth beneath their feet. He fought with the rage of blood betrayed. She fought with grief turned to flame. Sparks flew, shadows twisted, the night itself bending beneath their fury. He taunted her with every breath. "You were mine to command, born of my line. Your destiny was always bound to me." His words sought to chain her, but her defiance cut sharper than his steel. "I am no one's to command." Her claws tore through his armor, her howls splitting the night, her wolf a force neither light nor shadow, but both, blazing with power born of love and loss. The battle raged until the sky itself seemed to weep, and at last, with lightning pouring from the heavens, she drove him to his knees. His spear clattered to the ground, his amber eyes glaring up in fury and despair. "Then, prophecy has damned us all." Her claws hovered over his throat, her chest heaving, torn between blood and bond, between the whispers of family and the memory of Aldrich's final touch. For a moment she hesitated, the word brother coiling like chains around her, but then her gaze fell to Aldrich's still body, lying broken in the blood-soaked dirt. Her grief hardened into resolve, sharper than any blade. "For him," she whispered, her voice steady as stone. "For me, for every Omega who was ever silenced." Her claws slashed, his body crumpled lifeless to the earth. Silence fell heavy, thicker than blood. The storm eased, but its power lingered around her, swirling like a crown of shadow and light. Every soldier, every noble, every rival fell to their knees or bowed their heads in awe. She stood tall, bloodied but unbroken, Aldrich's fading mark glowing on her skin like a coronation. No longer servant, no longer outcast, no longer just a mate claimed by fate. She was something new, something feared, something revered. Queen. And as the smoke lifted from the battlefield, the world itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the dawn of the age she had been born to shape. The throne room rose from ruin like a scarred heart learning to beat again. Days had passed since the battlefield was drowned in fire, blood, and prophecy, yet the echoes of war still clung to the stones. The banners that once hung in arrogance were torn and mended, stitched together from the remnants of clans who had once sworn death to one another. Now they hung as fragile testaments of unity, trembling whenever the wind whispered through the open arches. And there she was, no longer the trembling Omega dragged in chains across marble, no longer the girl who had begged fate for freedom beneath a hollow tree. She sat upon the throne itself, the weight of it pressing into her bones, but her back remained unbent, her eyes steady as flame. The crown upon her brow was not wrought of gold, but forged from fire and shadow, from every scar, every loss, every defiance that had carried her to this moment. Around her, silence thickened, courtiers and elders kneeling, their voices swallowed by awe. They looked at her with fear, yes, but also with reverence, as though in her they saw not only a queen, but the prophecy alive and breathing, salvation and annihilation wrapped in the same skin. Celine's gaze moved over them, not cold, but clear. She had fought for this, bled for this, lost love for this, yet her heart, fractured and mended with threads of grief, still beat with warmth enough to carry them all. Her voice filled the hall, steady and rich, carrying like healing wind over wounds not yet closed. The age of kings is over. The age of the Omega Queen begins. The words rippled like fire through dry grass, igniting both fear and hope. Some bowed deeper, pressing foreheads to marble, while others whispered prayers to gods too old to answer. But none dared raise their eyes higher than hers. For in that moment, she was not just ruler, she was storm and balm, steel and flame, the bond of wolves stitched into a crown of survival. Yet even as power settled upon her shoulders, her heart whispered of him, the Alpha King who had bled his last breath into her hands. Aldrich's absence was an ache that no crown could mend. At night, when torches dimmed and silence pressed against her chambers, she traced the mark on her collarbone, the faint glow that still pulsed with the memory of his touch. She remembered the way he had steadied her in fury, the way his presence had burned and healed all at once. She had risen because of him, because he had seen not a servant, not a curse, but something more. His last words lived in her marrow. You were meant to rule. And so she ruled, not as his possession, but as his equal in spirit, his legacy alive in every command that left her lips. Each decree carried his fire, each act of mercy carried the healing warmth she had once denied herself. The council that had once conspired against her now bent beneath her gaze, their venom dried into silence. She forgave some, banished others, but always with the clarity that fear alone would not build a kingdom worth keeping. She demanded more, demanded loyalty stitched not from chains, but from choice. Beyond the palace walls, the clans once torn by centuries of bloodshed began to gather beneath her banner. The rivalries that had fractured them were soothed not by threat, but by the power of her survival, by the vision of a queen who had faced prophecy and chosen her own fate. They came, one by one, heads lowered, blades offered, until the courtyard rang with oaths. The sound was not of chains, but of healing, fragile but true. Still, shadows lingered. The prophecy remained, a blade hanging above them all. Whispers persisted of darkness within her blood, of the danger of a queen born from both bond and ruin. But Celine did not shrink from it. She carried both light and shadow as her crown, her very existence proof that one could be scarred and still be whole, could be feared and still bring healing. She rose each dawn with fire in her chest and a vow upon her tongue. Never again would an Omega bow to chains, never again would love be branded weakness. One evening, when the sun melted into gold across the horizon, she stood upon the balcony where once Aldrich had ruled. The wind tangled her hair, the mark on her skin glowing faintly in the dying light. The world below stretched wide and endless, armies now her armies, clans now her clans. Her heart ached, not with sorrow alone, but with gratitude, for the pain that had broken her, for the love that had healed her, for the destiny she had forged with her own blood. She whispered to the wind, as though he might still hear, "I will not let your sacrifice fade. I will carry it into every tomorrow." The court behind her remained silent, watching, waiting. She turned, her eyes burning with a flame that promised both wrath and grace. And they bowed, every one of them, not to a king, not to a prophecy, but to the first Omega Queen. And to you, who have walked with me through blood and storm, through ruin and healing, through love that both burned and saved, I ask something simple. If this story has touched your heart, if it has lit even a small flame of hope inside you, share that light. Leave your words in the comments so I may hear your voice as you have heard mine. Offer a like if her defiance stirred something in you, a subscription if you wish to walk with me into the tales yet to come. Every gesture is more than a mark on a screen. It is a thread of connection, a quiet act of healing, reminding us that stories only breathe when shared. The throne may belong to her, but the journey belongs to all of us. And together, beneath the rising dawn of a new age, we will carry the flame forward.